Aloha, it's Dave Lawrence, member-supported Hawaii Public Radio, all things considered. And today, a musical guest, undoubtedly interesting stories to tell. I'm looking forward to hearing some of them. Certainly makes interesting music and kind of a return. I got to see this artist almost 20 years ago in concert in Boston, and not since. Lili Land, the new album. Perhaps you saw her on The Tonight Show performing live, supporting her last record. She's a gifted violinist, songwriter, singer, and our guest today, Lili Haydn. Aloha and mahalo, Lili. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
The spelling of your last name has always intrigued me. What's that? What's the ethnicity that's based on?
Well, the truth is, and I haven't really talked about this, my mom made that name up.
Wow. Well, with Lotus as her first name, that doesn't seem like a huge surprise.
Yeah, so Lotus Weinstock was my mother, wonderful comedian, first woman to perform at the Comedy Store, and engaged to Lenny Bruce before he died. But she decided that she wanted to be completely free of the Philadelphia Jewish lineage, and she came up with Maury Haydn. So she was called Maury Haydn, and then she was with Lenny, and then when Lenny died, she met my dad, and my dad was running from the law, so I couldn't use his name, and I was called Cherub when we moved onto a commune, and then when I started acting, my agent said she cannot be called Cherub, and so Lilith was my original name, and so my mom decided that Lili Haydn was a good name, and so that's my name. So the ethnicity, it's really the imagination, which is actually quite. I think it's another kind of ethnicity.
Well, it's as often is the case in a lot of Jewish people, or people who go on to act. I don't know if it was connected to that, but people who maybe have an ethnic name of any different kind often shorten it or go with their middle name or vary it.
Yeah, sometimes. This was more because there was a law enforcement aspect to it. But yes.
That has its own relevance, and we didn't get his name in there. And forgive me for not. What's your dad's?
Well, my dad ended up going by David Jove, and he was the creator of a TV show it was a seminal TV show that it was called New Wave Theater. Some people may remember on the USA Network. And actually, now that he's passed on, I guess I can say his name. But I've been so trained as a child never to utter the name. In fact, I was blindfolded as I was being brought to his house. But he was known as the Acid King because he was the first person to mass produce LSD alongside Owsley Stanley. So he turned on the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and then was sort of hunted down all for what he said was turning the world on to God.
And he escaped, I'm presuming, from the way the story...
He escaped by convincing people he was crazy, which was not too much of a stretch, actually. He told me the story of how he convinced corrections officers that he was insane by letting a cigarette burn into his hand and eating a rat or something like that. It was right around the time of what was his name, the guy who ate rats You know what I'm talking about? I should have that name handy.
Yes, good reference for your story.
Yeah, exactly. I really, the funny thing is, I have it on my last record. My dad was really, I think my dad had just passed away, so I didn't really feel comfortable talking about it, and I never talked about my dad because he was an outlaw, and the amount of chaos that ensued whenever anything connected to him was uttered was enough to make anyone shut up. But this time I feel like I'm free, and I can tell my interest. Now it's literary fodder.
Well, what's the name? We haven't said it.
Oh, well, he was called David Britton, and he was also called David Jove, and he was also called David Snyder.
Okay. Wow.
So,
well, we have the full...
those were the three names that he was known.
Well, unlike Timothy Leary, good thing for him that the Moody Blues didn't make a song with his name.
Right.
Exactly. Wouldn't have worked out with that law enforcement aversion that he had at the time. What's the... when I think about that, growing up in a commune, and I was taking a look at some of the notes about your life, and I lost my mom last year. I lost my grandmom too.
I'm so sorry.
Same with losing your folks, it's all the same thing. So I wonder, when you look at there are a lot of ways your parents end up influencing you, but not a lot of people I run into can say, I mean, I used to be into the Dead. There were these people with the Rainbow Family. They may have something similar to what you went through, but are there ways that you look back at that as having an enduring impact on the person you turned out to be? Perhaps there's lifestyle things that you do every day that you think of mom or dad or both because of that sort of upbringing.
I haven't really thought of it, except I guess I feel a little unhinged from the rules that govern most people's lives, I guess, meaning I always feel like there's a workaround. I guess I don't feel that linear. This is very abstract. This doesn't actually answer your question. I guess it means that I don't follow the rules. Although I did my form of rebelling was that I did get really academic and kind of get very left brain for a while. And I studied political science at Brown University. So it was my way of kind of rebelling, and I never did drugs, and I was kind of uptight. So in a way, I guess that was how it influenced me. But as I've gotten older, and as I see that what I do doesn't really fit neatly into a category, and that pretty much everything I do is kind of my own concoction in a way, and certainly this record, which definitely doesn't fit neatly into a category, and is just really, and that's what I mean by Lilyland, actually, is that it's my own world. And I guess that's what all artists are doing, but this definitely is, it's not rock and roll, but it has elements of it because of who I've gotten to play with over the years. It's not classical music, although there's a lot of classical elements to it. And I guess in that my parents were kind of renegades and the black sheep and didn't follow the rules, I guess they set the example that's possible and that's legitimate.
It's a way to honor them, and to see, I guess, your evolution as a free spirit. Also, I guess, the aversion to substances that often would seem likely to happen with kids who grow up in a situation where they're surrounded by it. Sometimes they go the other way. A lot of rock star children that I've interacted, I've been fortunate to meet throughout decades doing this, and that sometimes is the effect that it has on them too, and they become very straight-laced or very studious or explore things that perhaps their parents' influence did not nurture them in. But when I think, and we'll talk about some of those artists that you mentioned because some of them are pretty powerful, but talking about when you say Lilyland and it's your world, there is something unusual about your world. And in this record, health is a critical part of this vehicle that we've got while we're here each life, and yours was affected by an unusual sort of thing with pesticides. I imagine it was, from what I was reading, and then it influences, as you said, it kind of creates it affects your world, and then you reflect it in the music. So if you could kind of describe what occurred and then how you translated it into release or whatever it is for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So about 5 years ago, I got really sick, and actually I got brain damage from pesticide poisoning that was in my house, and I found out that it's actually in 30 to 60 million homes in America. Anything built between 1948 and 88 has a chemical called chlordane in the foundation, and it was used to prevent termites. And once they realized in 88 that it was as bad as DDT, it became illegal here, but they still ship it overseas. And of course, there's no recourse because it has no half-life. So basically, it's probably in your home if that's when your home was built. So if you've heard of house sickness, a lot of times it's either mold or it's that, and the chemical is so pervasive that it's actually in 90% of breast milk, and it causes brain damage and a whole litany of other serious disorders, including death. And I found myself, I couldn't think, and I finally discovered what it was, and I couldn't process information, and I left everything I left everything behind. I evacuated. I was able to save the house with a very elaborate protocol. So if anybody's hearing this who is concerned, there is an elaborate protocol, and if you go to my website, I will have a little link for anybody who's interested.
What are some of the symptoms? What are some of the symptoms of it?
Basically, yeah, I couldn't think straight. My nose was running. And they're very particular. It was like this is probably more information than you need. I'm sure it is. I got like a cold flash up my leg. My tongue would go numb and my head would go numb, and I started to not be able to process information, where my identity had always been wrapped up in my ability to think my way through anything. I literally couldn't process information. I mean, it got so bad that there was one time where I actually rear-ended the car in front of me because I thought that red meant go. And it was really so I ended up getting rid of everything because the chemical was disturbed in the house, and it got into the heating and air conditioning system, and it contaminated everything I owned. So I got rid of literally everything: my grandmother's grand piano, all my pictures, everything. And I had to sell 2 cars, and I was wearing garbage bags because it was the poor men's hazmat. In fact, the inside cover of my record, if you've got the physical copy, has a picture of me wearing couture garbage bags. I just started designing outfits made of garbage bags as a sort of symbol of my triumph.
Poor man's hazmat. That's a great terminology.
And so what happened is I evacuated into my now fiance's place, and I was able to save the house, but I didn't have my health. And so I did every kind of therapy you can imagine, including hyperbaric oxygen therapy and a very intense drug detox and neurofeedback. And all of that helped, but I got a gig that I had to start practicing for, and I started sight reading classical music again. And day by day, as I was practicing, I would wake up feeling more crystal clear and more like myself. And it was truly a miracle. You can't imagine what it's like to lose your ability to sort of process information and be who you know yourself to be, and then get it back. And so, because it wasn't even losing my house or losing my possessions, it was losing my mind. And that was really, really scary. And so so music really saved my life. And so there's a song on the record called How I Got My Brains Back that starts with the melody of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto and then goes into this crazy wah-wah rock and roll violin solo that is very kind of exuberant and triumphant. And so it's for this reason that I've actually been even more adamant and vocal about the importance of music in schools, because music literally lights up the entire brain, causes neurogenesis, is key to the development and sustenance of the brain.
That's great to... It's been such a big part of your life in other ways, but to find the therapeutic aspect of it is pretty rewarding, too.
Oh, my God. It's really a miracle. I mean, honestly, I think about it. There's a new documentary, I think, called Inside Me, something Inside Me. It's about the experiments with music and people with Alzheimer's and dementia,
right,
and how music brings them back. I haven't seen the film, but the preview had me bawling.
It's kind of like being around plants. I have a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in Hawaii, being in nature is the great equalizer. I mean, you guys, I love Hawaii. In fact, I will tell you, I was contacted by a Hawaiian promoter, and we're working on a Hawaiian tour. So I hope I can come play for everyone.
Is that Laser Bear?
I don't know what that's not the name I have, but I can tell you a little bit later. It's still to be determined. So
cool. It's great. I love it.
Quiet.
Love it. That's very cool. And before, on the sort of note of, because I think it's valuable when you say, it's too much information. That's not really, because I try to use the show to help people in as many ways as possible. And sometimes stories like that can help on a lot of different levels. So I'm grateful that you would take the time to tell us about that. And I hope that it can be useful for somebody in need. On that note of lending lending a helping hand is sort of something that you do, whether it's breast cancer, United We Stand Festival at UCLA, 1 Billion Rising, Valentine's Day event, just some highlights from your recent activities in your life, Craig Ritchie Project, Angel Food Benefit, fundraiser for Somali Mom, Pete Townsend, 2012 Amnesty International 50th anniversary album, lots of ways. When you grew up, and maybe it's after this experience that led to Lilyland, when did that philanthropic side blossom, and talk a little bit about how it means something to you?
My mom was a stand-up comedian, as I mentioned, and she was always performing for every benefit. And it was just sort of understood that it was her way of connecting to the world, and it was just the right thing to do. And it was really just my mom and me. My dad would sort of pop in as this kind of good-hearted boogeyman, sort of. But my mom was always doing these fundraisers, and when she passed away, I really took that mantle. I think it was just kind of always understood. And then I think because my dad was abusive, and my mom was kind of always being kind of abused, beat up on, I had this kind of passion to protect the underdog. And also I was a couple years younger than my classmates in school, and I've always been little anyway. So I was always picked on. So I understood what it meant to feel like the underdog. And so when I saw Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the Frank Capra movie, it was just, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. I was going to defend, people who couldn't defend themselves. And in college, that was why I studied political science, besides the fact that I was just really passionate about it. But when I realized, after working for the East Harlem Interfaith Coalition for Fair Banking for a year, that how incremental the change was, and how kind of debilitating that kind of bureaucratic process could be for somebody without the right constitution, and how effective, how moving music really was. And when I would play and make my music, people would instantly respond. I felt like maybe my way of affecting change would be to make music. And so I try to do that, whether it's, my mom used to carry around a little Casio keyboard, and we would serenade people on the sidewalk if she felt like they needed a pick-me-up. And so I've played in old age homes and cancer centers, and in an actual elevator, and in arenas, and for me, music is my connection to the world, and that which we can't see as well.
And in honor of your mom, a vehicle to give back.
Definitely.
Yeah, after my mom died, I started doing this bit Fridays called Helping Hand.
Oh, wonderful.
And I spotlight groups that support people who are struggling, whatever case it may be.
That's awesome.
And so I can...
well, if I come to Hawaii, maybe I can, collaborate with you on that.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool. I like to highlight people who take time to help out, and it's neat to hear. It's, like I said, it's a wonderful tribute to Mom that you did that.
Well, that's how we honor our legacy. I mean, we ultimately, I think, even when we rebel, we end up coming around and with a little introspection, realize that we are inextricably linked, and there's a way of redeeming that, taking the best, and actually by letting go of what wasn't the best part of our parents, we actually help with their redemption, I think. Yeah,
we further their generosity, their open-mindedness, acceptance of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever it is. No, I completely feel that. Guests, Lily, you've been so lucky, and it wouldn't be right. Do you have a moment or two, or
I'm cool.
Okay, just double check.
Thank you.
Didn't want to be eating into Lili Haydn's precious time this morning or afternoon.
I'm delighted. Thank you.
And that I mentioned it earlier, and it's worth mentioning because, boy, it seems like it's another way of a signpost, or I don't know what the right word is, a way of looking at your career. I got to see you. It was, I believe, the fall of 1995. I don't think you did their first spring 94 tour, but or maybe it was the spring 95 tour. So I think it was the fall of 95, and it was the Fleet Center, and it was in Boston. Has a new name now. But anyway, at the new Boston Garden, you were playing, and you opened for Page Plant with that orchestra and the unleaded, whatever.
I wish I could say that was me. I opened for them on their next tour, which was their last U.S. tour, which was 98.
Is that the last one? Okay, well, I saw that one too. I saw all the...
No, but I actually did get to play with them in L.A. on that tour, which was amazing. I grew up on classical music and my mom's music, as she was a singer-songwriter as well. And so I didn't know any of the pop culture references. I didn't know any rock and roll. I didn't, and my sort of the filter through which I understood and listened to all this stuff was really purely classical. So when I heard Page and Plant, especially on that tour with the orchestra, I was completely blown away. I mean, my mind was blown. And some friends of mine were actually opening for them on the tour that you're talking about, the No Quarter tour. And
who was that? The Rusted Root? No.
It was the Tragically Hip did a lot of.
Oh yeah, right. The Tragically Hip. You're right. That's right. That's who it was.
And they did a bunch of those dates. They didn't open for them in LA, but when they opened for them in San Diego, I got on a train by myself on a whim and went down and saw them, and then ended up getting to meet Page and Plant there, not through my friends, because there was this sort of buffer zone between the opening act and them, right. But because their Egyptian percussionist, Hossam Ramzi, whose work is amazing if anybody's into Arabic percussion, he's a hero of mine and to so many. Hossam Ramzi, he and I had done a session in England like a couple years before that, and he called me over to meet the guys, and I don't know where I got the balls to, or the ovum, as my mom would say, to hand them a flyer for my show at the Viper Room, but I did, and I invited Robert Plant and Jimmy Page to the Viper Room, and the next night they all came to the Viper Room to check out our show, and then asked me to sit in with them on Kashmir at the Forum, which was happening the next night. And they said, well, you know Kashmir, of course.
Yeah.
And I said, well, of course. And I did not know at all. I had, I basically was, it was all new to me. But I think my sort of unorthodox and fresh perspective on it may have given them the feeling that I could actually do this. And then a couple years later, when I was in England, I reached out to Robert, and he said, we were just thinking we're going to do another U.S. tour, and we need somebody like you to open for us. And so that came together, and I did the whole U.S. tour, and it was really awesome.
Walking into Clarksdale, that's the, right?
Right.
That's the name of it. I remember it now. Right, I remember the... Yeah, I saw that one, actually. Then I saw you, even cooler place, I saw you at Madison Square Garden, because that tour, I went and saw them...
That was an interesting one. Actually, they didn't publish, when they advertised, they didn't say that there was going to be an opening act. So when the lights went down and people started freaking out because they think, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant are about to walk out, and the lights come up and it's me, this 5-foot-tall violinist, they started to boo. They started to boo me off stage, and but having been trained by my criminal father and my stand-up comedian mother to ride my adrenaline, I was undaunted, and I started prowling the stage with my violin and got people to quiet down a little bit. And by the end of it, we got a standing ovation.
Yeah, you were very impressive. I remember it was. And there was a lot of buzz, too, a lot of rock radio. I worked at BCN in Boston at the time. A lot of different, you had there was like an energy, whatever the deal was, your label. I can't remember the circumstances. After all the stuff we've been through, it's kind of vague all these years later.
Yeah.
But there were some other guests who equally were, at that time, I remember I had chased him down to see him a few different times. He's passed away since, but Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, how did you get that thing together?
Well, that was another lucky a lucky kind of magical confluence of events. I had been on this television show for ABC with an all-female band, and one of the guest stars of the show was working with this guy called Baba Ji, not the Indian guru, but an Indian promoter producer, and he's still one of my great friends. And he called me a couple of years later. He tracked me down from that show and said, I like your energy, and would you like to play with Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan? And I said, well, of course. I mean, I love Nusrat, but that's not my style. I don't know what that, I don't play that kind of music. Why me? Why would you do that? He said, your energy is the right energy. So I got immersed so I spent the day with Nusrat. I was brought into a hotel room with just him and his harmonium, and he didn't speak a lick of English, and I didn't speak, I didn't speak his language, except for we joined in music, and he played me some passages, and he said, "You play." And I was expected to just play back to him what I heard. And fortunately, I have perfect pitch and was able to just kind of wing it. And I learned a few of the tunes, and he had me play in the set that night. And but I remember before the show feeling so out of my element and feeling so overwhelmed by this. I mean, people spend their entire lives learning this kind of music, and to just step into it without being disrespectful or, less than a dilettante, but to really come in with my heart full, which is really where we all meet anyway. I really fell to my knees and prayed that the angels would carry me and give me the notes, and that I would, that technical challenges would not be an obstacle, and that the heart would really help me fly. And that was a really triumphant night. To stand 5 feet from somebody who's literally plucking thunderbolts out of the air as he channels this music, it was one of the most mind-blowing things I've ever been a part of.
It wouldn't be right because you said a couple things there. I gotta just end on this note. So on spirituality, you talk to your mom and dad. You feel them. Anything you want to share?
My mom used to say the concept of reincarnation is no more phenomenal than the concept of life itself. I grew up with sort of a sense of alternative reality, where anything's possible. And I also have a really healthy respect for kind of empirical knowledge as well. But you can't watch Cosmos and and know anything about science without knowing that how little we actually know. So, from both a visceral place where I really do believe there's something bigger than what we see, and from an empirical place, I respect the uncertainty principle. There's just, you can't say with any certainty that, that God or whatever it is does not exist. I think the best, the most solid ground anybody can stand on is to say, I don't know. Science suggests that this will probably happen. And then I'm just covering my bases there. And for me personally, I definitely feel my mom's presence. I've been a little bit more afraid of my dad's presence because he was kind of a scary dude. But I definitely feel that there's so much more that we don't see. And so it's with humility and playfulness that I dance with the muse.
Only child, or do you have siblings?
Only child.
Yeah, you got a special connection with
definitely.
Lotus.
What about you? Are you only child or siblings?
I have an older brother, but he went against my mother, testified at her divorce from my father.
Aww.
Love is what keeps us together. It's not who you were born from or who adopted you, or it's love, and that's
definitely.
We don't realize it sometimes, I think. And again, like you, I don't know what the hell's going on. I know there is something. What you said could have been me talking. So I'll leave it.
Oh, cool.
I'll leave it at that. The record is Lili Land, and Lili Haydn, a fascinating person to speak to. I really hope that whether you come here or not, things keep going great for you, that your health stays 100% and that no more trouble comes your way. And if you do come here, we have a great little, like, it's kind of like a mini Austin City Limits right in the building. We could do a cool little thing with an audience, without an audience, if you just want to come by. Maybe we help out some people in need, whatever it is. But thank you so much for being on All Things Considered. It means a lot. Hope you had fun.
Thank you so much. Total fun. Great to meet you. I hope I get to see you in person. Aloha, this is Lili Haydn, and you're tuned to All Things Considered with Dave Lawrence.